My father was dying and we needed money. I married a blind heiress. I became her eyes. I fed her, dressed her, and described the world to her for 3 years. Yesterday I silently walked into the room and saw her reading my diary. She looked up, locked eyes with me and said, "I'm not blind, I watched everything. I'm glad to have you here. Follow this story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Gerald, and I married a woman for her money. I can say it now, 3 years later, sitting in this quiet house in Beacon Hill, where the floorboards creak with every step and the smell of lavender lingers in every room. I can admit it because what started as a calculated decision became something I never expected. Something real. It was January of 2021 when Dr. Morrison delivered the news that would change everything. My father Samuel sat in that sterile hospital room, his 73-year-old hands trembling as he gripped mine. The cancer had spread faster than anyone anticipated. The treatment existed, but it came with a price tag that might as well have been written in another language, $250,000. I was 50 years old, working as a small-town accountant making $3,200 a month. My father's insurance would cover maybe 20% of the costs. The rest would have to come from somewhere else, and that somewhere else didn't exist. I had $17,000 in savings, and Samuel's life insurance policy would only pay out $50,000 after his death, which wasn't exactly helpful for keeping him alive. That's when Dr. Morrison mentioned Paige Whitmore in what he probably thought was casual conversation. She was a patient of his colleague, a woman who had lost her sight in a car accident 5 years earlier. Wealthy family, he said. Very wealthy. Her parents had died in the same accident that took her vision, leaving her with a trust fund worth millions. She was 47, never married, and according to the doctor's casual observation, quite lonely. I remember driving home that night, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The idea that had started as a desperate thought began to take shape. I could hear Samuel's voice echoing in my mind from when I was a child. Sometimes, Gerald, good men have to make hard choices. He'd said that when he worked 3 jobs to put me through college after my mother died. Now it was my turn to make a hard choice. Meeting Paige was surprisingly easy. Dr. Morrison's colleague arranged an introduction at a charity event for the blind community. I volunteered to help with setup, and there she was, sitting alone at a corner table, her fingers tracing the rim of a wine glass. She wore dark sunglasses indoors and a simple black dress that somehow made her look both elegant and fragile. "Gerald," I said when the coordinator introduced us, "I help organize these events." That was my first lie. I'd never helped organize anything for the blind community in my life. "Paige," she replied, extending her hand in my general direction. I took it, noting how soft her skin was, how perfectly manicured her nails were. "Do you enjoy this kind of work?" "I find it meaningful," I said, which was true in a way. What I was about to do would certainly be meaningful, even if not in the way she understood. We talked for 2 hours that night. She told me about her isolation, how difficult it was to trust people's motives when you couldn't see their expressions. She mentioned almost casually that she received $15,000 a month from her trust fund, and that she often felt like money was all people saw when they looked at her. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, proving her point in the most devastating way possible. Our courtship lasted 3 months. I visited her twice a week, then 3 times, then daily. I described sunsets she couldn't see, read her books in my voice instead of the audio versions she was used to, and slowly became the eyes she had lost. During those months, I learned things about Paige that I hadn't expected to matter. She loved when I described the way snow fell on the windows of her Beacon Hill mansion. She had memorized the layout of every room so perfectly that she rarely bumped into anything, moving through her house like a graceful dancer who knew every step by heart. She laughed at my terrible jokes about accounting, and listened intently when I talked about my father's condition. Sometimes I caught myself forgetting why I was there. We married in April of 2021 in a small ceremony in her living room. I wore my father's old suit, and she wore a cream-colored dress that she said had been her mother's. The justice of the peace asked us to exchange vows, and I promised to be her eyes, to protect her, to love her. When I said the words, something strange happened. They didn't feel entirely like lies. The photograph from that day sits on the mantel above the fireplace. In it, I'm looking at her with an expression that could be mistaken for devotion. She's smiling, but there's something in her posture, something slightly stiff, that makes the whole scene look like we're both performing roles in a play we didn't audition for. My father's treatment began immediately. The experimental therapy Dr. Morrison recommended was aggressive and expensive, but for the first few months it seemed to be working. Samuel's color returned, his appetite improved, and he started talking about things he wanted to do when he got better. I visited him every day after spending my mornings with Paige, describing her world to her and helping her navigate daily tasks. Living with Paige was unlike anything I had imagined. She moved through the house with a confidence that amazed me, her fingers trailing along walls and furniture with practiced ease. She could cook simple meals, though I usually handled the more complex dishes, describing each ingredient as I added it so she could learn. "Tell me about the onions," she would say. "Are they golden? Can you hear them sizzling?" I would describe the way they turned translucent, the sound they made in the hot oil, the smell that filled the kitchen. She would tilt her head, listening with an intensity that made me feel like my words were creating the only reality she could access. In the evenings, we would sit by the fireplace, and I would read to her. She preferred classic literature, books she said she had loved before the accident but could experience differently through someone else's voice. When I read to her, she would close her eyes behind her dark glasses, and sometimes a smile would play at the corners of her mouth. "Your voice changes when you read dialogue," she told me one night. "You become different characters. I can see them in my mind." That comment struck me in a way I didn't expect. She was seeing things through my words, trusting me to be accurate, honest, complete. The weight of that responsibility felt heavier than I had anticipated. 3 months into our marriage, my father took a turn for the worse. The cancer had found new places to grow, and Dr. Morrison's optimism began to fade. I started spending longer hours at the hospital, leaving Paige alone more often than I preferred. She never complained, never made me feel guilty for the time I spent away, but I could sense her loneliness growing. One evening, I came home to find her standing by the window in the living room, her hand pressed against the glass. She couldn't see the street outside, couldn't watch the people walking by or the cars passing, but she stood there anyway. "I can feel the vibrations of the traffic," she said when she heard me come in. "Sometimes I pretend I can see the headlights reflecting off the wet pavement." I walked over and stood beside her, looking out at the ordinary street scene she was imagining. "The streetlights are just coming on," I told her. "There's a couple walking by with an umbrella sharing it even though the rain stopped an hour ago. They're laughing about something." She turned toward me, and even through the dark glasses I could feel her attention focused on my face. "Do you think they're happy?" "Yes," I said. "They look happy." "Good," she whispered. "I like to think there are happy people in the world I can't see." That night I lay awake listening to her breathing beside me, wondering when exactly I had stopped thinking about her money and started thinking about her happiness. The transition had been so gradual that I couldn't pinpoint the moment when my feelings shifted. Samuel was still dying, I still needed the financial security she provided, but something else had grown alongside those practical concerns. I started keeping a journal around this time, writing down my thoughts and observations in a leather notebook I kept in the drawer of my nightstand. I told myself it was to process the complexity of my situation, but really, I think I needed somewhere to be honest about what was happening to me. My father died in March of 2023, almost exactly 2 years after his diagnosis. I was holding his hand when he passed, and the last thing he said to me was, "You did good, son. You made the right choices." He never knew the whole truth about why I married Paige, but he had met her several times during his treatment, and he genuinely liked her. "She's got a good heart," he told me once, "and she looks at you like you hung the moon, even if she can't see it." After Samuel's funeral, Paige and I fell into a deeper routine. I had inherited his house but sold it, using the $50,000 insurance payout to pay off his remaining medical debts. We were fully committed to our life together now, and I found myself genuinely caring about her well-being in ways that had nothing to do with money. But lately, small things have been bothering me. Paige seems to know when I'm sad before I say anything. She finds objects in rooms I haven't described to her. Yesterday, she handed me my reading glasses before I realized I needed them. Maybe after 3 years of living together, she simply learned to read my moods and movements better than I realized. Or maybe I'm imagining things because guilt makes you paranoid about everything. The first time I noticed something was off, we were in the kitchen making breakfast. I was standing behind Paige, guiding her hands as she scrambled eggs, when she suddenly stepped sideways to avoid the cabinet door I had left open. The problem was I hadn't mentioned the door to her. I hadn't described the kitchen layout that morning at all. "Careful," I said after she had already moved. "There's a cabinet door open." She paused, her hand still holding the spatula. "Oh, thank you," I told myself she must have heard the slight creak of the hinges, or felt the air movement differently with the door open. After 3 years of living without sight, her other senses had probably become incredibly acute. That had to be it. But it planted a seed of doubt that I couldn't quite shake. A week later, we were sitting in the living room when I dropped my father's old pocket watch. It fell silently onto the thick carpet beside my chair, and before I could even begin to look for it, Paige said, "It's by your left foot." I froze. The watch had made no sound when it fell. The carpet was too thick, and the watch too light. "How did you know?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. She tilted her head in that way she did when she was thinking. "I heard it fall. It didn't make any sound. Everything makes sound, Gerald. You just have to know how to listen." That night I started a new section in my journal. I titled it, "Observations," and began documenting every incident that seemed unusual. I told myself I was being paranoid, that losing a parent makes you question everything, makes you look for patterns that aren't really there. But I kept writing them down anyway. October 15th. Paige knew I was wearing my blue shirt before she touched it, or I mentioned the color. When I asked how she knew, she said she could smell the detergent I used for that particular shirt. Possible, but strange. October 20th. She navigated around a chair I had moved in the living room, even though I hadn't told her I'd moved it. She claimed she could tell from the way the air circulation felt different in the room. Again, possible. October 22nd. During a thunderstorm, she commented on the lightning before the thunder came. Said she could feel the electrical change in the air. I researched this later and found that some people can indeed sense electrical changes, but it felt wrong somehow. The incidents were small, individually explainable, but they were adding up. I found myself watching her more carefully, studying the way she moved, the way she responded to things. Sometimes I caught her face turned toward me in a way that felt too direct, too focused, as if she were looking at me rather than listening to me. One evening in late October, I decided to test my suspicions. It felt awful even thinking about it, like I was betraying the trust we had built, but I needed to know. We were in the bedroom getting ready for sleep. Paige was sitting at her vanity, running her fingers through her hair. Behind her, reflected in the mirror she couldn't see, I held up 3 fingers. "How many fingers am I holding up?" I asked, trying to make it sound like a joke. She turned toward me, her face blank. "That's not funny, Gerald. I'm sorry, I didn't know how to finish that sentence." She stood up and walked over to me, her hands finding my face with practiced ease. "Are you having doubts about us?" The question hit me like a physical blow. Here I was, questioning her disability while she was worried about my commitment to our marriage. The guilt was overwhelming. "No," I said quickly. "Of course not. I'm sorry. I don't know why I said that." She kissed me gently on the forehead. "We're both still adjusting. 3 years isn't very long for a marriage, especially one that started the way ours did." That comment made me pause. What did she mean by the way ours did? I wanted to ask, but something in her tone suggested I shouldn't push. 2 weeks later, something happened that I couldn't explain away or rationalize. We were having dinner when my phone rang. I glanced at the screen and saw that it was Dr. Morrison. I hadn't spoken to him since my father's funeral, and seeing his name made my chest tighten with old grief. I must have made some expression of distress because Paige immediately set down her fork and said, "What's wrong?" But here's the thing. I hadn't said anything. I hadn't made any sound at all. I had simply looked at my phone screen and felt sad. "Nothing," I said, declining the call. "Just a spam caller." She nodded and went back to eating, but something had shifted. I excused myself and went to the bathroom, where I splashed cold water on my face and stared at myself in the mirror. How could she have known I was upset if she couldn't see my expression? That night I wrote in my journal, "She saw me react to the phone, I'm almost certain, but how is that possible?" The next morning I woke up to find Paige already dressed and sitting by the bedroom window. She was facing outside toward the street in a way that looked for all the world like she was watching something. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Listening to the morning," she said. "The birds are different today. I think it's going to rain." I looked outside. The sky was gray, and she was right about the rain, but she was sitting in a position that would have been perfect for watching the street if she could see it. I started paying closer attention to her daily routines. When she cooked, she moved around the kitchen with a confidence that went beyond memorization. When we walked through the house, She avoided obstacles with a precision that seemed impossible for someone relying only on spatial memory and sound. When we sat together in the evening, she would turn toward me at moments when I hadn't spoken, as if responding to visual cues. One afternoon, I was reading in the living room when she came in and sat across from me. I was absorbed in my book and didn't acknowledge her immediately. After a few minutes, she said, "That must be a good book. You've been frowning at it for the past 10 minutes. My blood went cold. I had been frowning, frustrated by a particularly dense passage about tax law, but I was reading silently, and I hadn't moved or made any sound that would indicate my emotional state. "How did you know I was frowning?" She seemed to consider her answer carefully. "Your breathing changes when you're concentrating hard, and you make these little huffing sounds when you're annoyed." I thought about this explanation. It was possible, I supposed, but it felt like she was working too hard to justify her knowledge. That evening, I tried another test. I positioned myself behind her while she was washing dishes and held up different numbers of fingers. Of course, she couldn't respond, because she wasn't facing me and I wasn't asking her to guess. But I wanted to see if she would react in any unconscious way. She didn't. She continued washing dishes normally, humming softly to herself. But then something strange happened. After she finished and turned around, she said, "You've been standing there for a while. Is everything okay?" She was right. I had been standing there watching her for about 5 minutes, but I had been standing perfectly still, not making any noise. How could she have known? "Just admiring you," I said, which was partially true. After 3 years of marriage, I had genuinely come to find her beautiful. The way she moved, the gentle expressions that played across her face, the competent way she handled daily tasks despite her supposed limitation. She smiled, but something about it seemed forced. "You're sweet." As November progressed, the incidents became more frequent and more impossible to explain. She would comment on my clothes before I told her what I was wearing. She would turn toward sounds that were too quiet for someone to hear from across the room. She would navigate around furniture that had been moved without her knowledge. I started leaving small tests around the house. I would move objects slightly and see if she noticed. I would wear unusual clothing combinations and wait to see if she commented. I would make subtle changes to our daily routines to see if she adapted too quickly. The results were unsettling. She seemed to notice everything. One evening, I was particularly frustrated after a day of subtle testing that had yielded suspicious results. I was writing in my journal, documenting another impossible incident, when Paige came into the bedroom. "You've been quiet tonight," she said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Is something bothering you?" I closed the journal and slipped it into the nightstand drawer. "Just tired." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that made my heart race. "Gerald, do you ever wonder if the people we love are keeping secrets from us?" The question hung in the air between us like a challenge. I felt like she was looking directly into my soul, even through those dark glasses she always wore. "Everyone keeps some secrets," I said carefully. "But what about the big ones? The ones that change everything?" I stared at her, my pulse pounding. Was she talking about my original motives for marrying her? Or was she talking about something else entirely? "What kind of secrets are you thinking about?" She lay down beside me and curled up against my shoulder. "Nothing specific, just wondering." But as I held her that night, feeling her breathing against my chest, I couldn't shake the feeling that she knew something I didn't know she knew. The next morning, I made a decision. I was going to start being more systematic about my observations. If Paige was hiding something about her condition, I was going to figure out what it was. I owed it to both of us to understand the truth. I had no idea how much the truth was going to cost. It happened on a Tuesday morning in early November. I had told Paige I was going to the grocery store, but I forgot my wallet and came back 15 minutes later. The house was quiet when I entered through the front door, my footsteps muffled by the thick Persian rug in the hallway. I was heading toward our bedroom to get my wallet when I heard something that made me freeze. The soft sound of pages turning. Not the thick, deliberate movement of someone reading Braille, but the quick, light flutter of someone scanning regular text. My heart started pounding as I crept closer to our bedroom. The door was slightly ajar, and through the gap, I could see Paige sitting at the small desk by the window. She wasn't wearing her dark glasses. Her head was bent over something, and her eyes were moving back and forth across the page in the unmistakable pattern of someone reading. The something she was reading was my leather journal. For a moment, I couldn't process what I was seeing. My wife, who had been blind for 5 years, was reading my private thoughts with perfect ease. The woman I had been caring for. describing the world to, guiding through daily life, was sitting there absorbing every doubt, every observation, every guilty confession I had written about our marriage. I must have made some sound, a sharp intake of breath or a footstep on a creaky floorboard because she looked up. Our eyes met directly, and in that instant the entire foundation of our relationship crumbled. She didn't look startled. She didn't fumble for her glasses or try to pretend she hadn't been reading. She simply closed the journal carefully and said, "Hello, Gerald. You can see." The words came out as a whisper. "Yes." "How long?" She set the journal down on the desk and turned to face me fully. Without the dark glasses, her eyes were a clear blue I had only glimpsed briefly during our wedding ceremony. They were intelligent, alert, and completely focused on my face. I was never blind, Gerald. Not for a single day of our marriage. The room started spinning around me. I gripped the doorframe to steady myself, feeling like I might collapse. "That's impossible. The accident. The doctors," Dr. Morrison said. Dr. Morrison said what I needed him to say. Her voice was calm, matter-of-fact, as if she were discussing the weather. "The car accident was real. My parents did die, but I never lost my sight." I stumbled into the room and sat heavily on the edge of our bed. 3 years. For 3 years you've been watching you, yes. The simple admission hit me like a physical blow. Every moment of tenderness, every careful description of sunsets and strangers on the street, every gentle guidance through daily tasks, every time I had thought I was alone with my thoughts and emotions, she had been watching. Why? The word came out broken, barely audible. Paige stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the street she had pretended never to see. Because I needed to know if someone could love me for who I am, not what I have. Because I've spent my entire adult life wondering if people care about me or my trust fund. "So you lied to everyone." "Yes, just like you did." The accusation stung because it was true. I had lied about my reasons for marrying her, just as she had lied about her condition. But somehow her deception felt bigger, more elaborate, more cruel. "I read your journal, Gerald. All of it. I know you married me because your father was dying and you needed money for his treatment." She turned back to me, her expression unreadable. "But I also know what else you wrote." My stomach dropped. I knew exactly what else I had written. Entries about how I had grown to care for her, how her laugh made me smile, how I looked forward to our evening reading sessions, how holding her at night had become the best part of my day. I had documented my transformation from a desperate man using a woman to someone who genuinely loved his wife. "You wrote about watching me sleep," she continued, her voice softer now. "About how peaceful I looked. About how you worried when I had nightmares. About the night you cried because you thought I was getting sick, and you couldn't bear the thought of losing me." I remembered that night. She had been running a fever, and I had sat up all night monitoring her temperature, terrified that something was seriously wrong. I had written that I realized, in those dark hours, that my feelings for her had become real. That I loved her regardless of why I had married her. "You saw all of that?" I asked. "I saw you cry, Gerald. I saw you hold my hand while you thought I was unconscious with fever. I saw you pace the room, worried sick about a woman you supposedly married for money." The betrayal was overwhelming, but there was something else mixed in with it. A strange relief that she knew the truth about my feelings, even if she had learned it in the worst possible way. "How?" I asked. "How did you fool everyone? The doctors, the nurses, Dr. Morrison's colleague." "Dr. Peterson isn't Dr. Morrison's colleague. He's my cousin. He's been helping me maintain this fiction for 5 years." She sat down in the chair across from me, finally removing the facade of careful movement I'd grown so accustomed to. The charity events, the support groups for the blind, the whole community I was supposedly part of. It was all carefully orchestrated. But why? Why go to such elaborate lengths? "Because I'm worth $2.5 million, Gerald. Because I inherited my parents' entire estate when I was 42 years old. Because every man I dated after that saw dollar signs when they looked at me." Her voice grew bitter. "Because I needed to know if anyone could love me when they thought I was helpless and needy instead of rich and independent." I stared at her, trying to process the magnitude of what she was telling me. "So I was what? A test subject?" "At first, yes." She met my gaze directly, not flinching from the accusation. "Dr. Peterson told me about your father's condition, about your financial situation. I thought you would be perfect for my experiment. A man desperate enough to marry a disabled woman for money, but decent enough to actually take care of her. An experiment." The words tasted bitter in my mouth. But you became more than that. She leaned forward, her voice taking on an urgency I had never heard before. Gerald, I watched you transform. I watched you go from someone who was performing kindness to someone who genuinely felt it. I saw you fall in love with a woman you thought was broken. How could you watch me suffer through my father's death and not say anything? How could you let me believe I was alone in my grief when you were right there seeing everything? Because you weren't alone. You held my hand through every difficult night. You told me about your memories of him. You shared your pain with me, even when you thought I couldn't fully understand it because I couldn't see your expressions. She paused, but I could see them, Gerald. I saw every tear, every moment of anguish. And I wanted to comfort you, but I couldn't break character. The cruel irony of it hit me like a wave. She had been there for me during the worst period of my life, but she had also been lying to me every single day of it. You read my doubts about you, I said, nodding toward the journal. You knew I was starting to suspect something. I've known since October 15th when you first wrote about my unusual behavior. She almost smiled. You're very observant, Gerald. More observant than I gave you credit for. I had to be increasingly careful after that. The tests I was doing, you knew about those too. Of course. The moved furniture, the unusual clothing, the random questions. I saw all of it. I even saw you holding up fingers behind my back trying to catch me in a mistake. I felt my face burn with embarrassment. All of my careful detective work, all of my subtle investigation, she'd been aware of every bit of it. Why didn't you stop me? Why didn't you say something sooner? Because I was trying to decide what to do. Because reading your journal made me realize that we had both started this marriage as lies, but we had both developed real feelings along the way. She stood up and walked over to the dresser where our wedding photo sat. Because I was terrified that if I told you the truth, I would lose the only genuine love I've ever had. Genuine love? I laughed bitterly. What's genuine about any of this? We're both frauds, Paige. We both entered this marriage under false pretenses. But we're not the same people who entered that marriage. She picked up the wedding photo and stared at it. Look at this picture, Gerald, really look at it. We're both performing, both playing roles we thought we needed to play. But what we built after that day, the life we've shared, the way we've cared for each other, that wasn't performance. That was real. I looked at the photo she was holding. She was right. We both looked stiff, artificial, like actors in a play neither of us wanted to be in, but I remembered the months that followed, the gradual ease that had developed between us, the quiet moments that had felt authentic, despite the lies surrounding them. I fell in love with you, Gerald, she said quietly, not with the man who married me for money, but with the man who read to me every night, who worried about me when I was sick, who held me when I had nightmares about my parents' accident. I fell in love with your kindness, your patience, your genuine concern for my well-being. But you were lying the entire time. So were you. You never told me you married me for the money. You never told me about your guilt. You never told me that you started loving me despite your original motives. She set the photo down. We've both been keeping secrets, Gerald. The only difference is that mine was about what I could see, and yours was about what you felt. The room fell silent except for the sound of our breathing. Outside I could hear the normal sounds of the neighborhood, people going about their ordinary lives completely unaware that inside this house, a marriage was either ending or being reborn. What happens now? I asked. I don't know. She walked back over to the window, looking out at the world she had always been able to see. I know you feel betrayed. I know this changes everything. But I also know that what we've built together, the love we've shared, that was real regardless of how it started. I sat there staring at her, this woman I had thought I knew, trying to reconcile the helpless person I had been caring for with the calculating individual who had orchestrated an elaborate deception. But I was also trying to reconcile my own guilt over marrying her for money with the genuine affection I had developed for her. You've been watching me this whole time, I said finally. Every private moment, every vulnerable instant. You've seen things I never gave you permission to see. She turned back to me, and I saw tears in her eyes for the first time since our confrontation began. I know. And I know how that feels because you've been loving me under false pretenses for 3 years. We've both violated each other's trust, Gerald. We've both been living a lie. But even as she said it, even as I felt the betrayal burning in my chest, I couldn't deny the truth in her words. The connection between us, the intimacy we had shared, the way we had supported each other through difficult times. None of that had been fake. It had been built on a foundation of lies, but the structure itself was real. The question was whether that structure could survive the truth. The silence that followed Paige's admission stretched between us like a chasm. I sat on our bed, staring at this woman I thought I knew, while she stood by the window looking out at a world she had always been able to see. The morning light coming through the glass illuminated her face in a way I had never noticed before, perhaps because I had never seen her without the protective barrier of dark glasses. How many others were there? I asked finally. Others? Men. How many other men did you test before me? She turned away from the window, and I saw something flicker across her face. Guilt, perhaps, or shame. 4. The number hit me like a physical blow. 4 other men went through what I went through? Not exactly what you went through. They all failed much earlier in the process. Failed how? She moved to the chair across from me, sitting down carefully. Even now, even after her revelation, some of her blind mannerisms persisted, as if 3 years of performance had become second nature. The first one, Marcus, only lasted 3 weeks. He was interested in my money from the beginning, but he had no patience for actually caring for someone he thought was disabled. He would leave me alone for hours, sometimes entire days. He'd order takeout instead of cooking with me, hire servants to do the things he was supposed to do himself. I thought about all the meals I had prepared with her, all the times I had patiently described ingredients and techniques, the satisfaction I had felt when she smiled at a dish we had made together. The second one, David, made it 2 months. He was kinder than Marcus, but he treated me like a child. He would pat my head when I did something he considered clever for a blind person. He talked to me like I was mentally impaired as well as visually impaired. Her voice grew cold at the memory. The night I ended it with him, he told a friend on the phone that taking care of me was like having a very expensive pet. My stomach churned. And the third? Robert lasted 4 months. He was actually quite devoted, very attentive to my needs. But he fell in love with the idea of being a savior, not with me. He would tell people how noble he was for marrying a disabled woman. He liked the sympathy and admiration he got for his sacrifice. She paused, looking down at her hands. The fourth one, James, almost made it to the altar. We were together for 8 months. He was patient, kind, seemingly genuine in his care for me. But he had a weakness for gambling, and he started using my monthly allowance to cover his debts. When I confronted him about the missing money, still maintaining my blindness, he lied to my face and then convinced me I must have miscounted because blind people can't keep track of money properly. So I was number 5. You were supposed to be number 5, but you became something else entirely. I stood up and began pacing the room, needing movement to process what she was telling me. You tested me. For 3 years you tested me. At first, yes, but Gerald, you have to understand. After the first few months, it stopped being a test. It became real life. Real life? I spun around to face her. What about when I cried at my father's funeral? Was that a test? What about when I held you during thunderstorms because you said they reminded you of the night your parents died? What about when I sat up all night when you had food poisoning, describing every sound and sensation to keep you calm? Those weren't tests. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Those were the moments I realized I was falling in love with you, but you watched me suffer through all of it. You saw my grief, my exhaustion, my worry, and you said nothing. What could I say? That I was sorry for your loss while maintaining that I couldn't see your tears? That I appreciated your care while pretending I didn't notice how exhausted you were? She stood up, her composure finally cracking. Gerald, I was trapped by my own deception. Every day that passed made it harder to tell the truth because every day made the lie bigger. I thought about my own secret, the original reason for our marriage that I had never confessed. Like my lie about why I married you. Exactly like that. We stared at each other across the room, 2 people who had been living parallel deceptions for 3 years. The journal, I said. How long have you been reading it? Since the beginning. You keep it in the nightstand drawer, and you write in it almost every night before bed. I usually read it in the mornings while you were showering. The violation felt immense. Everything I wrote. My doubts about our marriage, my fears about my father, my confusion about my feelings for you. You saw all of it. Yes. And it's how I knew you were a good man, Gerald. It's how I knew your feelings for me were real, even when they started as something else. What about that night I wrote about wanting to leave? When I said I felt trapped and didn't know if I could continue the charade, she flinched. That was the hardest entry to read. It was also when I realized I had to make a choice about whether to tell you the truth. But you didn't tell me. No, because the next night you wrote about how my laughter made you happy, and the night after that, you wrote about how proud you were when I successfully made dinner by myself. You wrote about how our evening reading sessions had become the best part of your day. She paused. You wrote that you thought you might be falling in love with me and you didn't know if that made you a better person or a worse one. I remembered that entry. It had been 6 months into our marriage and I had been struggling with the realization that my feelings for Paige were becoming genuine. I had felt guilty for developing real affection for someone I had married for mercenary reasons. You wrote about the night you realized you loved me, she continued. It was when I had that fever, and you stayed awake all night taking care of me. You wrote that watching me sleep, knowing how vulnerable I was, made you understand that your feelings had become real, that you would protect me regardless of money or obligations. You remember it exactly. I memorized it. Because it was the moment I realized that my test had become real life for both of us. I sat back down on the bed, feeling drained. So what happens now? We both know the truth about each other. We both know our marriage started as a lie. I don't know. She sat down beside me, carefully maintaining some distance. I know you feel betrayed by what I've done. I know watching me without my knowledge feels like a violation. It does. Every private moment, every time I thought I was alone with my thoughts, you were there observing me. But Gerald, you were never alone. Even when you thought I couldn't see you, I was still there with you. When you cried about your father, I cried too, but you couldn't see my tears. When you worried about me during my fever, I wanted to tell you I was okay, but I couldn't break character. You could have told me the truth at any point. So could you. You could have told me you married me for money. You could have explained about your father's medical bills, about your desperation. Instead, you let me believe you chose me for love. The parallel stung because it was accurate. We had both been living lies, both protecting ourselves from vulnerability at the other's expense. The difference is that I developed real feelings for you, I said. So did I. Gerald, I watched you become a different person over these 3 years. I watched you go from someone who was performing kindness to someone who genuinely felt it. I watched you learn to love someone you thought was damaged and helpless. But you're not damaged or helpless. No, I'm not. But you didn't know that when you fell in love with me. You loved someone you thought needed your protection, your guidance, your constant care. You loved me when you thought I couldn't give you anything back except companionship. I thought about this. It was true that I had developed feelings for Paige, believing she was completely dependent on me. I had found satisfaction in being needed, purpose in being essential to her daily life. What about you? I asked. What did you fall in love with? I fell in love with your patience, with the way you never got frustrated when I asked you to describe something for the 3rd time, with how you would spend an hour helping me organize my closet so I could find things independently, with the way you held me when I pretended to have nightmares about my parents. You pretended to have nightmares? Some of them were pretend, but some were real. The trauma of my parents' death was real, Gerald. The accident was real. The grief was real. Only the blindness was fake. So I was comforting you for real trauma while you were lying about your disability. Yes, and you were genuinely helping me while lying about why you married me. We sat in silence again, the weight of our mutual deception settling around us like dust. Outside, I could hear normal sounds of life continuing, people going to work, children walking to school, the world carrying on while ours fell apart. I need to ask you something, I said finally. Okay. That night when you asked me about secrets, about whether people we love keep secrets from us, were you testing me then? No. I was trying to give you an opening to tell me the truth about why you married me. I was hoping you would confess so that I could confess too. But I didn't. Neither did I. So we both failed that test. We both chose to protect ourselves instead of being vulnerable with each other. I looked around our bedroom at the life we had built together over 3 years. The books I had read to her were still stacked on the nightstand. The clothes I had helped her organize were still neatly arranged in the closet. The photos from our wedding and the few trips we had taken together were still displayed on the dresser. Was any of it real? I asked. All of it was real, Gerald. The only thing that was fake was my blindness. Everything else, every moment of connection, every laugh, every tender gesture, every night we held each other, that was all genuine. But it was based on a lie. It was based on 2 lies. But what grew from those lies was honest. I stood up again, needing to move. I don't know if I can get past this, Paige. The deception, the manipulation, the way you watched me without my consent for 3 years. I understand. Do you? Do you understand that every moment I thought was private was actually being observed? That every vulnerable instant was being cataloged and analyzed? Yes. And do you understand that I fell in love with the man who was only with me because his father was dying and he needed money? The accusation was fair, but it still felt like a punch to the gut. That's not who I became. I know, just like the woman who manipulated you into marriage isn't who I became either. So what are we supposed to do with that? The question hung in the air between us for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. What were we supposed to do with the knowledge that our entire marriage had been built on mutual deceptions, but that somewhere in the middle of those lies, we had found something real? I walked to the window where Paige had been standing and looked out at the street. Everything looked the same as it had that morning when I left for the grocery store, but the world felt completely different now. A man was walking his dog. A woman was getting into her car. Children were riding bicycles on the sidewalk. Normal people living normal lives, while inside this house everything I thought I knew about my marriage was crumbling. Gerald, Paige said softly behind me. Talk to me. I turned around to face her. She was still sitting on the bed, her hands folded in her lap, looking smaller somehow without her dark glasses and without the careful posture she had maintained for 3 years. I need to understand something, I said. When you watched me grieve my father, when you saw me crying and exhausted and falling apart, how could you not say something? How could you let me suffer alone when you could see exactly how much pain I was in? I wasn't letting you suffer alone. I was suffering with you. But I didn't know that. I thought you couldn't see how much I was struggling. I thought I was protecting you from the worst of my grief because you had enough problems of your own. I know. And I wanted to comfort you more than you'll ever understand. There were nights when you would cry yourself to sleep thinking I was already asleep. And I would lie there wanting to hold you, wanting to tell you that everything would be okay. But I couldn't without revealing everything. I thought about those dark months when my father was dying. How I had tried to be strong for Paige during the day, and then would collapse with exhaustion and grief when I thought she couldn't see. Knowing that she had witnessed all of that vulnerability without my consent felt like being stripped naked in public. You saw me at my weakest moments and said nothing. Yes, just like you lived with me for 3 years knowing you had married me for money and said nothing. That's different. How is it different, Gerald? You let me fall in love with you knowing that your original motives were financial. You let me believe you had chosen me for love when you had really chosen me for survival. Because I did fall in love with you, my feelings became real. So did mine. The difference is that you could have told me the truth about your father and his medical bills at any time without destroying your life. I couldn't tell you the truth about my sight without admitting to a massive fraud. I hadn't thought about it that way. If I had confessed to Paige that I married her initially for financial reasons, the worst that could have happened was that she would be hurt and angry. If she had confessed to faking blindness, she could have faced legal consequences for fraud, not to mention the complete destruction of her social life and reputation. But you did commit fraud, I said. You took money from government disability programs, you received special accommodations. No, I didn't. I never applied for any government benefits. I never took any accommodation money. The only money I used was from my own trust fund, Gerald. The only people I deceived were the men I dated and the doctors who helped me. Dr. Peterson helped you lie to me for 3 years. Dr. Peterson helped me protect myself from men who might have been dangerous. Do you know what it's like to be a single woman with millions of dollars? Do you know how many men have tried to manipulate me, control me, even threaten me when they found out about my inheritance? I thought about the men she had described earlier, the ones who had failed her tests. Is that why you did this, because you were afraid? Partly, but also because I wanted to know if someone could love me when they thought I had nothing to offer except myself. When they thought I was completely dependent on them, vulnerable, needy. But that's not who you are. No, it's not. But the man who could love that version of me, I knew he would be someone special, someone worth trusting with my real self. I sat down in the chair across from her, feeling the weight of what she was saying. So this was all a test to see if I was worthy of your trust. At first, but Gerald, you have to believe me when I tell you that it stopped being a test. Watching you care for me, watching you sacrifice for me, watching you develop genuine feelings despite your original motives. That wasn't part of any experiment. That was just life. Life built on lies. Life built on two lies that became one truth. What truth? That we love each other. Really love each other. Not the people we pretended to be, but the people we actually are. I stared at her, this woman who had deceived me so completely, and yet had somehow become the most important person in my world. How can we love each other if we don't even know each other? But we do know each other, Gerald. I know that you talk in your sleep when you're worried. I know that you make coffee for 2 every morning even though you think I can't drink caffeine. I know that you read the same passage of a book 3 times when it reminds you of something sad. I know that you cry during commercials about fathers and sons. You know all of that because you were spying on me. And you know that I have nightmares about my parents, that I hate thunderstorms, that I laugh at terrible jokes just to make you feel good about telling them. You know that I prefer tea to coffee, but I never corrected you because I liked that you were trying to take care of me. You know all of that because you were paying attention to someone you thought could never reciprocate your care. She was right. I did know those things about her, and she did know those things about me. The problem was that all of our knowledge was tainted by the circumstances under which it was gained. I feel like I've been living in a house of mirrors, I said. Everything I thought was real was just a reflection of something else. The feelings were real, Gerald. The love was real. But how can I trust that? How can I trust anything about our relationship when it was all based on deception? The same way I can trust that your love for me is real even though you initially married me for money. The same way I can trust that your kindness was genuine even though it started as necessity. That's different. No, it's not. We both started this marriage with ulterior motives. We both developed real feelings despite those motives. We both kept secrets that could have destroyed what we built. I stood up and began pacing again, needing movement to process the complexity of what she was saying. But your secret was bigger, Paige. Your secret involved watching me without my knowledge for 3 years. Your secret meant that every private moment I thought I had was actually being observed and cataloged. You're right, it was bigger. But Gerald, I need you to understand something. She stood up and faced me directly. I didn't just watch you. I lived with you. I shared every meal, every conversation, every quiet evening. I may have been able to see you, but you could hear me, touch me, feel my reactions to everything we did together. My responses to you were real. But they were calculated. At first, maybe some of them were. But you can't calculate genuine laughter, Gerald. You can't fake the way someone relaxes in your arms. You can't pretend to be comforted by someone's voice reading to you every night. I thought about all the times I had held her during thunderstorms, how her breathing would slow and her body would relax against mine. I thought about the way she would smile when I described sunsets to her, how she would ask questions that seemed genuinely curious about the visual world she was supposedly missing. How much of it was real? I asked. All of it. Every response. Every emotion. Every moment of connection. The only thing that wasn't real was my blindness. That's a pretty big thing, Paige. I know, but Gerald, think about what you're saying. You're telling me that none of our relationship was real because I could see you. But you're the one who taught me that love isn't about what you can see. You're the one who showed me that intimacy comes from paying attention to someone, from caring about their needs, from being present with them. I taught you that? Yes. When you would describe things to me, you weren't just telling me what you could see. You were telling me what you thought I would want to know, what you thought would make me happy or help me understand. When you helped me cook, you weren't just guiding my hands. You were sharing an experience with me, making sure I felt included and capable. I remembered those cooking sessions, how proud I had felt when she successfully completed a complicated recipe, how natural it had become to work together in the kitchen like a team. You made me feel valued for who I was, not for what I could do or what I could see, she continued. You made me feel loved for my thoughts, my humor, my companionship, not for my appearance or my abilities or my money. But I did marry you for your money. Initially, yes, but that's not why you stayed married to me. After your father died, you could have left. The medical bills were paid, your obligation was fulfilled. But you didn't leave. She was right about that. After Samuel's funeral, I had had several opportunities to end our marriage gracefully. I could have claimed that caring for a disabled wife was too difficult without the motivation of my father's medical needs. Instead, I had found myself wanting to stay, wanting to continue building the life we had started. I stayed because I had grown to love you, and I fell in love with you because of how you stayed, because of how you treated me when you thought I couldn't see your kindness, couldn't appreciate your sacrifice, couldn't reciprocate your care. But you could see it. You could see all of it. Yes, I could. And what I saw was a man who was genuinely good, even when he thought no one was watching. What I saw was someone who kept his promises even when they became harder than he expected. What I saw was a person who learned to love someone he initially saw as a means to an end. I stopped pacing and looked at her. What I fell in love with was the illusion. The woman I thought I married doesn't exist. She does exist, Gerald. I am that woman. I do need comfort during thunderstorms. I do love hearing you read. I do laugh at your terrible accounting jokes. The only difference is that I can also see you when you tell them. That's not a small difference. No, it's not. But it's not the difference that matters most. What matters most? What matters most is whether you can forgive me for the lie, and whether I can forgive you for yours. What matters most is whether we can build something honest from here, or whether we're going to let our past deceptions destroy what we've built. I looked at her standing there, no longer hiding behind dark glasses, no longer moving with the careful deliberation of someone navigating the world without sight. She looked like a completely different person, but she also looked exactly like the woman I had fallen in love with. I don't know if I can do this, Paige, I said finally. I don't know if I can get past the feeling that I've been living a lie for 3 years. Then don't try to get past it. Just decide if you want to try living the truth. What would that look like? I don't know. We'd have to figure it out together. Honestly this time. The weight of the decision felt enormous. Everything familiar about our life together would have to be rebuilt from the ground up. Every routine, every assumption, every comfortable dynamic would have to be renegotiated now that we both knew the truth about each other. I need time, I said. I understand. I mean real time, not just a few hours or a few days. I need to think about whether this marriage can survive the truth. How much time? I don't know. Maybe we should separate for a while. Maybe I should stay somewhere else while we figure this out. The suggestion hung in the air between us, and I saw something flicker across her face. Fear, maybe. Or loss. If that's what you need, she said quietly. I think it is. Okay. We stood there looking at each other across the room that had been our shared bedroom for 3 years. Tomorrow, it would just be hers again, and I would be somewhere else, trying to figure out whether the love we had built could survive the truth about how we had built it. I spent 2 weeks in a hotel room downtown, staring at the ceiling and trying to make sense of everything that had happened. The Marriott on State Street became my temporary refuge, while I attempted to untangle 3 years of love built on mutual deception. Every morning I would wake up expecting to describe the weather to Paige, to guide her through breakfast, to read her the news. Instead, I sat alone with my coffee and my thoughts, trying to decide whether our marriage could survive the truth. The first few days were the worst. I felt angry, betrayed, manipulated. I kept thinking about all the moments when I had believed I was alone, only to realize that Paige had been watching me the entire time. The privacy I thought I had during my father's illness, the vulnerable moments when I had let my guard down, the times I had talked to myself or cried when I thought she couldn't see me. All of it had been observed and cataloged, but as the anger began to fade, other feelings took its place. I found myself missing her laugh, missing our evening reading sessions, missing the comfortable routine we had built together. I missed describing the world to her, even knowing now that she could see it perfectly well herself. I missed the way she would reach for my hand during movies, the way she would curl up against me during thunderstorms, the way she would listen with such attention when I read to her. On day 10 of my hotel stay, I received a package. Inside was my leather journal, along with a note written in Paige's handwriting. I thought you might want this back. I promise I'll never read it again without permission. P. I sat on the hotel bed holding the journal, thinking about all the private thoughts I had recorded in it over the past 3 years. All the doubts, fears, confessions, and revelations that I had thought were secret. But I also remembered what Paige had said about reading entries that documented my transformation, from someone performing kindness to someone genuinely feeling it. That night I opened the journal and read through it from the beginning. What I found surprised me. The early entries were exactly what I remembered. Guilt over marrying Paige for money, anxiety about maintaining the deception, worry about my father's condition. But as I read further, I could see the gradual change in my writing. The guilt became mixed with genuine affection. The anxiety about deception became concern for Paige's well-being. The worry about my father became balanced with appreciation for the woman who was supporting me through the crisis. By the 6-month mark, my entries were full of observations about Paige's humor, intelligence, and grace. I had written about how much I enjoyed our conversations, how comfortable I felt in her presence, how natural our partnership had become. Reading it now, I could see that I had fallen in love with her much earlier than I had admitted to myself. But there was something else in those entries that I hadn't noticed while living through it. Throughout the journal, I had documented moments when Paige seemed to understand me in ways that went beyond what I told her. Times when she comforted me before I expressed sadness, when she knew I was worried without me saying so, when she seemed to see straight into my heart. At the time, I had attributed this to her developing acute sensitivity to my moods and voices. Now I understood that she had literally been seeing into my heart, watching my expressions, reading my body language, observing all the nonverbal cues that I thought she was missing. The revelation should have made me feel more violated, but instead, it made me understand something important. Paige hadn't just been watching me, she had been truly seeing me. She had been paying attention to me in a way that no one ever had before. On day 12, I found myself walking past our house on Beacon Hill. I told myself I was just taking a longer route back to the hotel, but really, I wanted to see if Paige was okay. The house looked the same from the outside, but I noticed that the curtains in our bedroom were drawn, which was unusual. Paige had always preferred natural light, and I had gotten into the habit of opening all the curtains first thing every morning. I wondered if she was keeping them closed now, because she no longer had to pretend that light didn't matter to her, or if she was keeping them closed because she was sad. That evening my phone rang. It was Paige. "Gerald," she said when I answered. Her voice sounded smaller than usual, tired. "Hi. I wanted to ask you something and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Okay. Do you hate me?" The question caught me off guard. "No," I said immediately. "I don't hate you." "Are you sure? Because I would understand if you did. What I did was cruel, regardless of my reasons." I thought about this. Did I hate her? I was angry, hurt, confused, but underneath all of those feelings was something else. Something that felt like understanding. "I'm hurt," I said finally. "I feel betrayed, but I don't hate you, Paige." "Good, because I need to tell you something else and I don't want you to hear it from someone who hates me." "What is it?" I'm moving away. My chest tightened. "Where?" "I have family in California that I haven't seen in years. I think it's time to start over somewhere else, be honest about who I am for the first time in 5 years." "When?" "Next month. I've already started packing." I sat down heavily on the hotel bed. The idea of Paige leaving, of our separation becoming permanent, filled me with a panic I hadn't expected. Is this because of me? Because I needed time? No, Gerald. This is because I need to figure out how to be myself without performing disability. I need to learn how to relate to people honestly. And I can't do that here where everyone knows me as the blind heiress. What about us? There was a long pause. I don't know, that depends on whether you think there's an us worth saving. Do you? Yes, but not the us we were. We can't go back to that, Gerald. Too much was based on lies. Then what? Maybe we could try being the people we actually are. Maybe we could try building something real from the ground up. In California? If you wanted to. If you thought it was worth starting over. I looked around the sterile hotel room that had been my home for 2 weeks. Everything about it was temporary, impersonal, designed for people who were just passing through. I thought about the house on Beacon Hill that I had shared with Paige, the life we had built there, the routines and rituals that had become precious to me, even though they were based on deception. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "Anything." "If we started over completely honestly this time, would you want to?" "Want to what?" "Build something real. Try being married to each other for who we actually are instead of who we pretended to be." "Gerald, are you asking if I would marry you again? Knowing the truth about both of us?" I realized that's exactly what I was asking. "Yes. Yes," she said, without hesitation. "I would marry you again. I would marry the man who talked to himself while doing dishes because he thought I couldn't hear him. I would marry the man who cried during movies and tried to hide it. I would marry the man who sang off-key in the shower and didn't know I could hear him from the bedroom. I would marry the woman who pretended thunderstorms scared her just so I would hold her closer," I said. "I would marry the woman who laughed at my terrible jokes to make me feel good. I would marry the woman who was strong enough to take care of herself but kind enough to let me take care of her anyway." Those people exist, Gerald. They're who we really are underneath all the lies. I know. So what do we do now? I thought about it. We could try to rebuild our marriage in Boston, but we would always be haunted by the deception that had defined our first 3 years. We could separate permanently and try to find new lives with new people who had never known our lies. Or we could do something that felt impossible and terrifying and necessary. We could start completely over. I think, I said slowly, that I want to meet you for the first time. What do you mean? I mean I want to go to California with you. I want to introduce myself to you honestly, court you honestly, and see if we fall in love with each other honestly. Gerald, we're already married. Then I want to marry you again for the right reasons this time. There was silence on the other end of the line, and for a moment, I thought I had lost her. Then I heard something that made my heart race. She was crying. Are you sure? She asked through her tears. Are you sure you can forgive me for watching you all those years? Are you sure you can forgive me for marrying you for money? Yes. Then yes, I'm sure. It won't be easy, Gerald. We'll have to learn how to be honest with each other. We'll have to rebuild trust from nothing. I know. But Paige, the truth is I fell in love with you even when I thought you couldn't see me. And you fell in love with me even knowing that I had married you for the wrong reasons. If that's not a foundation for something real, I don't know what is. 6 weeks later, I stood in a small courthouse in Santa Barbara, California, holding the hand of a woman I was meeting for the first time. She wasn't wearing dark glasses and I wasn't hiding my reasons for being there. We were both exactly who we were. Two people who had found love in the most unlikely circumstances and were brave enough to try building it honestly. When the justice of the peace asked us to exchange vows, I looked directly into Paige's clear blue eyes and promised to love her for exactly who she was. She looked back at me without any barriers between us and promised to be honest about exactly who she was. The photograph from that day sits on the mantel of our new home in Montecito. In it, we're both smiling, but not the careful, performed smiles from our first wedding. These are the smiles of people who have chosen each other with full knowledge of each other's flaws and capabilities. We still read together in the evenings, but now Paige follows along in her own book. We still cook together, but now she moves around the kitchen with the confidence of someone who can see where she's going. We still hold each other during thunderstorms, but now I know she's not afraid of them. She just likes being close to me. Sometimes we talk about our first 3 years together, about the deceptions and discoveries that brought us to this point. We've agreed that the love was real, even when everything else was fake. We've agreed that we're grateful for the lies that taught us how to love each other honestly. I keep a new journal now and Paige has never asked to read it. But sometimes, when I'm writing in it, she'll sit beside me on the couch and lean against my shoulder while I work. She's not reading what I'm writing, but she's close enough that she could if she wanted to. The difference is that now she has permission. The trust we've built this time is different from what we had before. It's more fragile in some ways, because we both know how easily it can be broken. But it's also stronger, because it's based on choice rather than necessity, on honesty rather than performance, on seeing each other clearly rather than through the filters of our own needs and fears. I married a woman for her money and stayed for her love. She married me to test my character and stayed because I passed the test in ways neither of us expected. We both learned that sometimes the worst reasons for beginning something can lead to the best reasons for continuing it.